Hello and welcome to the Midweek Fix with me, Jamie Home, after what has been one of the most eventful weeks within football, with the news of the proposed Super League sending shockwaves across the world of football. So we've got lots to discuss tonight, and delighted to say that joining me and Keith to discuss the fallout from the now collapsed Super League and the potential damage it has done to the FSG brand of football writers Daniel Storey and Dion Fanning. Now, before we bring the lads in, a quick shout out to our sponsor, footballprizes.co.uk, who have a signed and framed Jordan Henderson montage, including a Champions League winners medal replica. If you want to be in with the chance of winning, it's $4.95 to enter. There are only 66 tickets available, and the offer ends next Wednesday. Now, Keith, I'm going to come to you first, mate. How would you sum up the last few days, not only as a Liverpool fan, but as a football fan? It's fair to say it's probably been action-packed.
Yeah, it's been box office, hasn't it? It's been all go, and we'll come to the lads in a second. I'm sure it was the boys were flat out with it.
We're even just as late again.
Yeah, even just as fans, like to see it all unfolding. There was a sense of theatre about it, you know. There's a UEFA announcement of a new format to the Champions League coming out, and next thing this bomb drops that 12 clubs are breaking away to form a Super League, and it went as expected, you know. It went like a lead balloon, and the fallout hasn't really been surprising because the whole thing to me just seemed rushed. It seemed like there was no planning to it. It was like UEFA were getting their plans out, and the boys had to jump in and say, well, this is what we're going to do. And it felt like it was very rushed in how they were getting it, because we'll touch on some of the points that were raised and the merits of a breakaway league or of a UEFA monopoly. But the way it came out was just wrong. And it was six Premier League clubs are the ones getting all the heat on this, but how they thought that they could just pull away and form a new league in Europe after Project Big Picture, and the blowback they had off that was just a bit staggering to think that was going to happen. So very curious to see what the lads made of it. But from a fan just sitting watching it, it was a bit jaw-dropping at times.
So it's a nice segue, and I'm going to come to you first, Daniel, because we were talking a little bit before we went live, and I'm sure Dion's the same. It's been nearly sleepless nights for you lads. As you said, the news nearly broke 11 o'clock every night, which was causing late nights for yourself. I mean, as a journalist, what was your reaction as you started to see some of this news filter through?
I don't know if it's possible to be both simultaneously shocked and entirely unsurprised, but that's kind of where I was at. I was kind of shocked at the extent of the arrangements, kind of the duplicity of those individuals who were involved and had misled other parties about their intentions for the previous few weeks. Shocked at the kind of scale of it all and the kind of balls of what was being suggested, and shocked too that it was clearly so owner and purely owner led, and shocked that they deigned to use the pandemic as a handy excuse for their plans, but also entirely unsurprised, because I think this is a plan that has been suggested before, not to this extent and with this organisation, and the organisation was then in doubt because of how quickly it all fell apart. But I think the plans were more detailed than we've ever heard before, and unsurprised, because I don't think it comes as a surprise to any football writer or journalist that those richest clubs want to seek a method of protecting their revenue from everyone else.
Are you similar, Dion? Did you see? Is it not a great surprise for you to see? Obviously, the speed at which the news broke. I think I don't think anybody was kind of expecting it. But is this something that you think's been coming for a while now?
Yeah, but I guess it's been coming for a while, whilst also simultaneously, a bit like Daniel says, but also simultaneously never thinking it's actually going to reach the stage it reached on Sunday night. Because even on Sunday, nobody would have. I don't think anyone would have been surprised if on Sunday it just was left in the ether somewhere that clubs, there was breakaway clubs, or they backed down, or there was never saying. So when the next step of it was taken, when they actually all came out with their statements and said they were part of the Super League, that was a bit stunning. The fact then that, so soon after that, it all seemed to be so badly thought through, and and now looking back on it, there are certain things you look at and you think, why were certain things not done from the point of view of actually selling this, getting, putting to one side the rights and wrongs of it for a second, but there's immediately 3 or 4 or 5 things you think of you could be doing, or you could be getting out in front of, rather than it being like even a very small thing. I think the fact that it all came out on a Sunday and Sky Sports were broadcasting all day Sunday and owned this story, and Gary Neville went viral with this story, and all these little things. And okay, the story came out in a newspaper report on Sunday morning, but if you're really planning that, you think about how are we going to control this? We're not going to be out. The story isn't going to be out of our control before we even announce it. And it was like they'd completely lost control of the story because Gary Neville, Sky Sports, who aren't uninterested parties, let's be honest about that. Like, I did find one of the parallel amusements of the whole thing, like the unbelievable sanctimony and self-righteousness was very amusing. Like, it was actually very amusing, and like, every minute you would see some line that would actually just ratchet that up even more. Like, one of my favorites being that Roman Abramovich must remember where he came from and do the right thing. Like, this was stuff that was being said. So but no, like, to go back to it, that's how I felt looking at it, that this is actually going ahead. And then just a kind of fascination, like a morbid fascination with the whole thing. I think probably even more than outrage, just this kind of fascination at like what are they actually thinking here? And because their message, I felt, was so bad, it was doomed.
Yeah, it's funny because we're getting a lot of comments in the chat around FSG, and Dion, you touched on it there about Sky. We're definitely going to touch on all of these things. It's certainly split opinion. FSG have certainly created a stir. I know me and you, Keith, have slightly different views, which is good. One thing I want to come to you on that, Keith. Do you, playing devil's advocate here, and off the back of what the lads were saying, do you think it's fair that bigger clubs who are driving, the more subscriptions, they're driving greater views globally, are pushing to ask for a fairer, or I would say lion's share of the wealth?
Yeah, it's a hard one, Jamie, isn't it? Because, people think the big clubs are being greedy for making a play for extra money, but they're the ones that generate the revenue. And, they're not looking to take it from the fans. They're looking to get more control of it. You can see some of the reasoning for them wanting to do it, but it was the execution that really does let them down. It was how they went about it, and to look for an increase. Liverpool, as Liverpool fans, we've been keeping an eye on the investment by Jerry Cardinal and Redboard and that, and how he's looking to get, his end game was the sort of subscription TV and nearly like a Netflix type style for football and all that sort of stuff. And you can see where they're looking to go with these things, but to go up against, they seem to be taking on too many parties. It wasn't going up against one person. It was too big of a fight for them to jump at. We saw, as we touched on earlier, about the Project Big Picture. The Big Six in the Premier League, and a couple of others went up against the Premier League and had blowback on that. So how they thought it was going to go against the whole of Europe, and again, the Premier League, and not even the Premier League, the lower league, you know, if you're a businessman, which these people are, they think business first, and they're not, I suppose, thinking of the fans. They're looking at how can we maximize our product. Fans hate hearing that. How can we maximize the revenue for our product? And this was their gambit. It was what they wanted to do. It's a move that they made, but they got it so wrong. And you know, the nuts and bolts of the actual plan, you know, probably does have a bit of merit to it, but just the way they went about it, they left themselves too open for arrows to get thrown back at them.
Daniel, talking about the way they went about it, the one thing, you know, whether it's in business, whether it's in sport, the key from good leaders, in my experience, is communication, open communication. I just can't for the life of me. And I've always, you know, look, don't get me wrong, I think FSG have done a good job on the whole. I think they've made errors. But I just can't for 1 second forgive the fact that they have made this decision without informing the manager. It looks like Billy Hogan wasn't informed based on the statement today. There was no type of sense check done with the fans. If there was, they would know very, very quickly that this isn't going to fly. Surely, for a decision of this magnitude, they do some type of pulse check. How could the owners have got this so wrong? I can't believe it.
I mean, I think the honest answer is that they wanted, they knew that the fan reaction would be poor. This is not the first time that John Henry and FSG have made serious missteps that has led to blowback from supporters and that have forced change. You know, you talk about the furloughing, you talk about trying to trademark the name Liverpool, and this is bigger than that, but it's in the same step. And my biggest problem with his apology was that, to me, sorry doesn't mean I shouldn't have done this thing. Sorry means I shouldn't have done this thing and I won't do it again. And yet it isn't the first time that something like this has happened. So you have to kind of worry about the genuineness of the apology. There are three options in terms of not bothering to consult the fans, or not bothering to kind of understand where the fans would be at. The first is that they haven't bothered to try. The second is that they don't care enough to try. And the third, which is perhaps the most dispiriting, and sadly I suspect is probably the case, is that they understand perfectly where the fans are at. It's just that they don't see that as a thing to cherish. They see that as a thing to be able to exploit for financial gain. And if indeed FSG and John Henry and the owners of the other clubs, we should say, if they do sit anywhere near that third point, then firstly, it's hard to see how these relationships are fixed between supporters and owners. And secondly, it's hard not to see that a form of this Super League, although I don't think it'll be this because I think they've been scared off, a form of this comes back again, because I don't think they have given up trying to maximize their revenue. And I think they think that fans are absolutely ripe for exploitation on that, because they believe that they will continue to love their club, and therefore, through no fault of their own, by loving their club and by wanting to support them, they're kind of giving a kind of tacit vindication of what those owners are trying to do.
I think another thing that really hurt me from a football perspective now, apart from all the noise and obviously the business side, which people are becoming very well versed over the last 48 hours, the football sense of it. Liverpool had a football match against Leeds that actually had a real a consequence, or so we believed, until we thought Liverpool were ultimately going to qualify for European competition, irrelevant of that game. Going into that, Dion, if you look at that from a football perspective, a manager has had to front up to cameras. The players have had to take the brunt of angry Leeds fans. They've had to answer questions and give answers that they don't even know the full context. And then there was silence from the powers that be, in my opinion, for far too long. And I think it's very poor form that they've put Klopp in that position, the players in that position, and they stayed silent for far too long.
Yeah. Well, I did think that of all the things that the fans might find it hard to forgive FSG for in this whole thing, if when you saw Klopp's interview beforehand, especially, I know he was a little bit, his tone was a little different afterwards, but the idea that actually FSG could be responsible for Klopp leaving in the summer because of this, I think that would be the thing that would truly sever and finish them with supporters, and that did look somehow possible, especially as I say.
Don't say it out loud. He's never leaving. He's never leaving.
But
Don't say that.
That was what it felt like, and but I guess they were thinking. But again, this comes back to the sort of the lack of planning about it, because John Henry isn't stupid. Like, he isn't. There are people involved in this who are stupid, but John Henry isn't one of them. Like, he isn't a stupid person, and the idea that just that there was nothing put out there, like that all the way this was portrayed from the get-go, which it was, the power grab, the elimination of competition, all these things, but the fact that there was no softening, if you like, there was no suggestion, like it appeared in the statement, but it was too late by then. There's some idea of fair prices for tickets. Like, if there'd been a 3-month soft campaign or a 6-week soft campaign, highlighting UEFA's flaws, and like, this is the thing, like, Daniel talks about the Super League coming back, which is a possibility, but like, what we're left with at the moment is a Swiss model, which is a terrible thing. Nobody is going to march on the streets about the Swiss model, and they should march on the streets about the Swiss model, because it's a monstrous competition. What the Champions League is going to, like, it protects the European football pyramid just about, but in every other way, it's a terrible thing that is going to be introduced on the back of this as a sort of as a concession to the big clubs, but just a unwieldy competition. And I would have looked at, if you remove the competition element, the idea of a league, a straightforward league, would be more attractive than the Swiss model. But that's another. Anyway, the point about that is, again, it just highlights that none of this groundwork was laid beforehand, and so you have this situation where, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer on Sunday, Klopp on Monday, they're coming out and they're having to take the brunt of this. Now they can handle it, but it really doesn't do any good for the sense of a club that is adrift and isn't really listening to supporters.
Keith, am I going to put you on the spot here? In fact, yeah, I am going to put you on the spot. You said to me today that you are in favour of a version of the Super League. Can I ask you what version in your head, when you think that, because I think we're all long in the tooth to know that this probably isn't going to go away. It's going to come back in some shape or form, whether it's in the near future or the distant future. This hasn't finished. When you think of how this could potentially work, what vision do you have in your head?
Well, it's hard, Jamie, because it's something that's been around. I think Florentino Perez tried this about 10 years ago. He tried to pull a Super League out as well. So Perez has previous in trying to get this wrestling the power away from UEFA. It's not going to go away. When I say I wouldn't mind the version of the Super League, it can't be the version they put forward where it's a closed shop, where there's 13 or 15 teams guaranteed into it every year, and they'll look at it in 23 years. I mean, Spurs must have been rubbing their hands at the thought that they were somehow. They got a rough ride, Spurs, with all this, to be fair. But you know what? Their statement, they came out and said, look, we didn't want to miss the boat if this goes ahead. And I think a lot of them were thinking that, if this does kick off, we don't want to be on the moral high ground saying, no, we'll take the moral stand here and be left behind. And that's what I think. There was a lot of fear by the clubs. But I just think the Super League football is always an evolution, from 30 years ago, Sky, the Premier League comes in. It changed English football for some say for the better, some say for the worse. The Champions League at the same time gets reformed and opens the doors for, monopolies from countries where you're getting, right, the first season I think was still one team per country, but as it went on, you're increasing the numbers, so the smaller nations were sort of getting filtered out. So it's been building up, and now you see the new plans of UEFA where, teams, if your coefficient is good, your league position won't matter, you'll still get invited in. It's a crazy setup, so it's not too much different than what the Super League were planning, but it was just the close shop element of it that I was against. If they could do a tiered system, even where there's enough places for enough countries, and it's not just England, Spain, Italy, Germany, France. I know the Germans sort of declined that, and Paris Saint-Germain, they're heavily tied in with UEFA, so that's probably why they weren't invited to the party. But you knew the teams they were looking to get, even big clubs like Ajax, Benfica, Porto, things like that maybe aren't as big as they once were, but are still big, weren't invited to the party. So you don't know how they would have opened it up. I just think they went about the close shop, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But I just think UEFA, people are jumping up on the high horse from UEFA, from Sky, from the Premier League. It's one group of billionaires fighting with another group of billionaires to control who exploits the fans. And that's what it came down to at the end. So I wouldn't mind a new bunch of billionaires exploiting us for a few years rather than the same ones all over again. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. Do you know what I mean? We'll stick with our kidnappers because they gave us food and water for a while. So that's just my stand. I just want a new face running it.
There's one term that's stuck out to me, and it's left a bitter taste, and it's come up in the comments a number of times already, and I'll come to you on it, Daniel. Legacy fans. Now, one thing that struck me with this, so you've got the heart and the head. I know I've been a football fan my whole life. Other than the missus and kids, it still is my life. But at the same time, I understand to a certain level how global businesses would work and how they're looking to scale their investment and those type of things. So the question I want to ask you is it unrealistic to think that you can run a global football club, being able to maximize profits, but also being able to retain, I suppose, and please that kind of local core fan base? And this is where that term legacy fans has kind of been thrown about, rightly or wrongly. These billionaire owners, these American owners that have come in, they ultimately don't care about those kind of legacy fans. They're about kind of bringing in the new age fan that's going to give them subscriptions for the long term. Do you think it's unrealistic now to be able to balance that kind of global and local elements at the same time?
I don't think it is unrealistic, because I think that should be the aim of every club. In a league like the Premier League, or certainly in the top half of the Premier League, where the exposure of the league is so great that you can attract new audiences, you can have revenue streams in every corner of the globe. I think that should be the aim. But what the last 48 hours has shown us is that their kind of disdain for what they call legacy fans and what we call, match going or local supporters is, they massively underestimated the power of them when they come together. And I think in England we are terrible at coming together to protest and unite on things. Partly I think it's because of the rise of tribalism. Partly I think it's because we just have this kind of weariness that we won't be able to do anything about it. What the last 48 hours have shown is that we can do something about it. That they didn't only change their minds because fans protested, but that was a strong, that negative PR was a huge part of them crawling back. And I don't think it is impossible to do that. You look at a club like Leicester City, who are not a global club yet, but they have an owner who is non-English and who gave hugely to help hugely in the community while he was there. And then after the tragedy of his death, his family continued to do that. And you'll struggle to speak to a Leicester supporter who has something bad to say about the owners. Now, if Leicester win the league or finish in the top four for the next 3 seasons, they may well see themselves as having a chance to go and be a global force, by which I mean increasing the revenue streams abroad. But if at that point they undid all the good work they'd done with their local supporters, they'd be idiots. They'd be stupid, because they have to coexist together. You can't have empty stadiums and still sell the product around the world, and you can't have a full stadium and do nothing about outside of that stadium in terms of generating revenue and hope to be successful. So they have to work together. And Dion said earlier, like, some of the people involved in this are stupid, and yeah, you do think that. It sounds really trite to say it, but you do think that, because how they thought that they could just kind of walk this through without, well, treating local supporters with such disdain. Like, some Liverpool supporters might have been up for this if they've had 3 months of canvassing them and getting their opinions, and, like Dion says, a kind of soft launch. They might have been up for that, but they completely ruined that by kind of just going, well, it's only our own supporters. They're idiots. They'll pay come what may. Supporters always do, and they're treating you like fools. And what the last 48 hours showed is that there is a biting point where people will say, you can't treat me like that anymore. I will kick up a fuss. And on a personal view, it's absolutely brilliant to see.
I don't think there's any bunch of fans who are not treating like fools, because if you look at it, like, every analysis of it is, oh, young fans don't have the attention span. The local fans, we don't need to do about that. And it basically comes down to, this is a phenomenon across all industries, is that people who use their own inability to actually get something done, and they blame it somehow on some deficiency in, like, and as I'm talking across all businesses, I'll say customer. They blame it on some deficiency on the customer that means they're not actually engaging with the thing they're trying to sell them. And that's not the case. Like, that is not the case in football. This idea that the young people, that the attention span or whatever is changing. That is not the problem for football, but it was a convenient problem, and it allows you to create a bit of noise and allows you to justify what you were doing in terms of something radical. And then, Perez talking about, having shorter matches and all this kind of stuff. It's just gimmicks designed to justify, and it's almost, and as to act as a diversion for any kind of radical, but in this case, a kind of radical but stupid idea or not thought out idea. And I think that's so I don't think any fans were being treated with respect. And I think it had that sense, of, but what do people like? People love it when they think that what the people want is something kind of dumber, because then it's easier for them to deliver it. Oh yeah, all they want is to see the big stars playing every week. I know how we can do that. I always come like that Henry Ford line, that he said, if I had asked before he invented the Ford Model T, he said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And that's what so many kind of bad decisions are based on, is the people are telling me what they want, and I am too fearful a person to actually do anything except the low. And this again, and this applies to everything. This applies to media. It applies to every business. But it is just, I am too fearful to do anything than to just hesitantly sort of say, let's give them what they want, and then we'll see if we can get away with that. But it's not a brave, it's not an imaginative way of looking at it. And that's one of the things that this Super League kind of lacks, is it's a kind of a failure of imagination. It's like, let's just get everyone as famous as possible in the world of football together forever, and they will never be apart, and that will succeed.
If you look at Barry's comment there, he leads me on to my next point, where he said that Sky took away our beautiful game. Sky took away our beautiful game and made it, I suppose, unattainable and unviewable, unwatchable for the youth. And that kind of leads me on to my next point, and I'll come to you on this one, Keith, because I think one thing is the narrative that has come out around this is that Sky are in some way the good guys in all of this. And that I fundamentally have a problem with that for lots of different reasons that I could probably spend 45 minutes going into. But, this idea that, whether it's Sky, UEFA, FIFA, the Premier League, they're all as bad as each other, and they're surely all operating within their own self-interest.
Yeah, I mean, they are. One of the things that got my back up was Gary Neville, and the amount of Liverpool fans that were nearly wanting to build a statue of Gary Neville and put it outside Anfield after he done his little speech the other day. And look, Gary Neville, he has skin in the fight. He's the chief, he's the face of football at Sky Sports. He doesn't want anything to affect the Premier League. Now, look, deep down, he's a decent fella, Gary Neville. I'm sure he is. His intentions are good, but it became a case of the good guys at Sky and Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville and Graham Souness was involved, and it became the good guys at Sky and the Premier League against the bad guys of the billionaire owners. And that was something, Sky were painted out as this paragon of virtue nearly in the whole thing, when it's not the case. I'm not saying Sky killed football, but you let the sharks into the pool and it's going to eventually end up like this. 30 years ago, the Premier League, it was all about build it, and the money just got obscene. It's still getting obscene now, and it was always going to come to this. You have billionaires. It's not millionaires. It's billionaire owners. It's shrewd businessmen. It's cutthroat, ruthless businessmen that are running the clubs now. It's not the local boy done good, Jack Walker story or anything owning clubs anymore. I know Daniel touched on Leicester and even your own club, Daniel, Nottingham Forest. They've a Greek owner, isn't it? Owns Olympiacos as well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And they're looking at clubs at that level, at championship level, to see who can they buy, because they know where the money is. So it's big money even coming in at that level. It's hard to go up against these guys. But one thing I do want to say, all the Sky this, and Daniel touched on about the fans getting together was a huge thing. Do you think the talk of government legislation into the Premier League, do you think that's going to go anywhere, or was that just lip service being paid to this situation? Do you think there is anything in that the government will look to maybe get on top of the football in England? Because at the moment it's just out of control.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, if we're adding people to not the good guys narrative, we probably should talk about the government, because they've announced a fan-led governmental review, which has been in the pipeline for 2 or 3 years and has been campaigned for by fans, and therefore that should be celebrated. But let's not be silly here. The government were spooked by the fact that the Premier League is one of, if not the most successful in terms of global PR in export that the UK has, and I think they were spooked and they were blindsided by the fact that this could happen. And I suspect they will try and bring into law a mechanism to stop a repeat of this. I hope that the fan-led governmental review leads to enforced supporter representation on boards. It's never going to be the German model, I don't think. I think you can only do that from a standing start. I don't think you can do that at this point. But I think you can have an enforced fan representation on boards. I think that would be brilliant. This is only a personal view, but I would rather this leads to a conversation about how fans can feel empowered within the game more than punishing the clubs involved. I think that's a far more sensible and meaningful point of progression from here, is to find a way that we can not just escape from the Super League, which I think would have been awful, but also end up further ahead of the starting line than we were on Sunday morning, which would be a brilliant ending to a pretty sorry situation.
Dion, I want to come to you, because there was and then we're going to dive a little bit into FSG, because there's been so many FSG comments coming through. It would be remiss not to touch on them in a little bit more detail. But I want to come to you on a comment, and somebody actually referenced it earlier in the comments. They said John Barnes was interviewed this morning, and he made a really interesting comment that I hadn't really thought about it this way. He said, often the kind of narrative when these owners, these foreign owners, American owners were coming in to take over at a variety of clubs, the narrative coming out was that they needed to understand football. These businessmen needed to understand football. John Barnes made the point today that in reality, it's actually the other way around, in that once they come in, these big owners, these American owners, for example, it's actually the fans that need to understand big business. It was an interesting concept. Do you think that that's fair? Do you think that we need to, as fans, start adapting to the kind of the business speak and the business approach rather than the kind of heart-led football fan approach?
No.
Good man. I love it.
No, for lots of reasons. Because I think on a very simple level, first of all, I think there are so many different versions of different businesses, different business models involved, even among the 12 clubs. Like, this is one of the reasons I think it didn't succeed. Like, who were the two clubs that left from the English clubs first? Chelsea and Manchester City. Both clubs who actually don't really have a huge need to make any money from football. So they're not all businesses. Like, Liverpool need to make, FSG want to make money from Liverpool. They want it to sustain itself somehow, because that's the only way they can actually succeed. And and one of the reasons this is happening is because financial fair play hasn't worked. But this isn't, and also big business. Like, again, these aren't massive business. This isn't Google. These clubs aren't Google. These aren't Apple. Like, they're pretty small businesses, really. The reason they have such power and such weight, the British government would not get involved in whatever, I can't remember the statistics are, but a Tesco superstore in a big city has a kind of revenue the size of a Premier League club. You know what I mean? Like, they're not massive businesses. They are massive because of the emotional attachment that people have to them. That's what is emotional about them. If Tesco were doing something with a supermarket somewhere, Boris Johnson wouldn't be talking about it. Keir Starmer wouldn't be talking about it. They're talking about it because of the emotion it brings, and the emotion that it engenders in people. I think what fans need to do is to actually, and this is also impossible, and we'll probably get into this more with FSG as well, is actually to try and actually figure out what they really want from their football clubs. Because you see what happens with a Newcastle United. Like, they want Mike Ashley out. They want Mike Ashley out no matter who's going to take over the club. So the idea that there's a Saudi wealth fund coming in, or Saudi Arabia behind, they're not that bothered about that. Manchester City's response to the ownership of the club, the Manchester City fans, has been tribal. It's been what Daniel talked about. All those things, because they've delivered success, and because it was very interesting that every supporter this week felt sort of liberated to attack their own club, because
I'm so used to defending them over the years, Dion. I'll be honest.
But everyone felt liberated. I think because everyone was attacking everybody. It was like, right, we can actually, and maybe you don't want to get into this, like, just what the subconscious was doing, but maybe those fans who kind of know when they're defending ownership models and owners that they aren't really defensible. Maybe this was an opportunity to let it all out, and they let it all out. But then it was kind of interesting. Sometimes you'd see on the mentions if replies, if an Everton fan said something, suddenly a little bit of tribalism would kind of get back into it. But that was something that was interesting about it. But I think that's what supporters need to do. What do they want from the club? I don't think they need to understand business, first of all, because I don't think we don't know. There are so many different reasons why people are owning these clubs to actually say you must look at it from a business point of view. No, they need to look at it from what do they really want from this club, because what a lot of fans ultimately want from the club is somebody who is just going to spend whatever money they can to make their club successful. Like, that's the reality. That's not business, but it's also not sport really as it should be either.
It's funny. To be honest, we've got such a range of kind of viewpoints on FSG, and I'm going to come to you, Keith, because we're going to dive in a little bit on FSG, and we've touched on them a little bit, and Daniel made the point about, you know, it's a series of apologies, and I was weirdly only having this discussion with my son before. He's a 9-year-old, and he was apologising about something, and it, you know, if you keep doing the same things over and over again and apologising, the apology doesn't become as meaningful. It just feels like you're saying it to get out of trouble. I felt like there was a sense of that. And look, I'll give John Henry his credit. You know, no one else has stood up and kind of done that type of apology. And the thing that I did like, before we get into the things maybe that we didn't, is the fact that he took full ownership. So he kind of, you know, he apologized obviously for hanging Klopp, the players, disturbing the game. He referenced Billy Hogan, as we said before. Is it fair to say, though, for a lot of Liverpool fans, and look, I'll be honest, I include myself in this, I still think FSG are good owners, and we're going to come on to exactly what are good owners, and Dion just touched on it a little bit in a couple of questions' time. But for you, is this kind of one apology too far? Because it kind of feels to me like they don't actually care about fan culture or traditions. They don't, you know, they can get away with what they can get away with. And then when these annoying legacy fans stamp their feet and make a little bit too noise, they'll come in with their apologies.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's not the first strike against them. We all know that. It was touched on earlier, you know, the furlough, the £77 tickets, the copyright name Liverpool, those sort of things. And especially, look, speaking from a Liverpool point of view at FSG, they know that the likes of Spirit of Shankly, you know, they're quite vocal for anything like that. So it's not a case that you can sneak something like this in at Liverpool and expect to get away with it. So they must have known, you know, there's going to be a blowback for this, and it's not going to wash. How many more times can they make those mistakes? And to me, this was one that I think they were expecting the blowback from it, but they probably felt, if we get over the initial bit of outrage here and we get this off the ground, and I don't just mean FSG, I'm talking about the whole lot of the 12 clubs that were involved in this. We get over this initial bit of moaning, we're away, we can get this set up. I just don't think they expected the level. I mean, going back to Liverpool, we had people calling for Bill Shankly's statue to be removed from outside of Anfield. Yes. You know, you had all sorts of stuff going on, you know, and Gary Neville done a tweet quoting Bill Shankly with the socialism and all, and you know, it's not that way anymore. But you can't have a socialist, you know, outlook and a socialist club and want to be spending millions. You know, it's a hard one to balance. I think FSG, they knew there was going to be a bit of action on it, and they just felt, if we get it, if we can push it through, it'll be worth, the reward will be worth the risk. You know, it wasn't. You know, it was just one too many. It's another apology. It's John Henry coming out. You know, as we said there, he's not a football fan. You know, the Glazers aren't football fans. Stan Kroenke isn't a football fan. They're not, you know, the Man City owners, I don't think they're football fans. Maybe they are, I don't know. But, you know, they're not in it for the old fans. So they don't really care about fans. They want to push what they can. We only say it from a Liverpool point of view, but I'm sure other clubs have as many issues as Liverpool and FSG and John Henry. But I just felt, yeah, it's a lot of people think it's one too many. This has pushed a lot of fans over the edge that maybe were pro FSG and have now turned to maybe anti FSG.
Where do you sit on this, Daniel? Do you think that they've ultimately damaged their reputation beyond repair for a lot of fans?
I mean, I'm sure they probably have. As you kind of mentioned earlier, I'm also sure that there's a huge spectrum of Liverpool fans. I think what it should at least do is it should remove that kind of facade that there is any genuine care there for supporters beyond their monetizing potential. That might be a really depressing thing to say, but it's true. And it's not just true at Liverpool, it's true of lots of clubs. We all like to think our clubs are special, and they are. We also like to feel that our club owners care about us more than any other club, because that plays into a narrative that means we don't have to address the horrible fact that we're probably being emotionally blackmailed and exploited or every season. Now, our clubs give us things back, and Liverpool won a Champions League and a Premier League title, and that's a pretty effective way of giving things back. So I think some supporters will think, yes, I'm disappointed by this, but I would probably have traded in this disappointment, or I wouldn't have traded in this disappointment for a Premier League title and a Champions League title. And I certainly wouldn't have traded it in for what happened under Hicks and Gillette. And there aren't a long queue of, benefactors and billionaires with great intentions waiting in the wings, because that just isn't the case. But I actually believe this could be a positive thing in a way, depending on how you look at it. But it's very rare you get a billionaire on the back foot. And I think the 6 owners of our Premier League clubs, the 6 billionaire owners who for the first time in a long time, and certainly for the first time simultaneously, are on the back foot. And so that provides us with an opportunity now to reinforce why we matter. Because I don't think, I can't ever be 100% confident they'll ever listen, but I'm certain that they're never more likely to listen than they are now, because they believe they owe fans something. Now, that might just be to regain good PR, it might just be to get back in their good books, it might just be to kind of feel that their own positions are safer than they were 2 days ago. But that doesn't really matter. As long as fans get something out of this, it will be worth it.
Daniel, am I living in cloudland? To try and convince myself that all of this means that we're going to go and buy Kylian Mbappe. This is as a make good. A man can dream, can't he?
Henry Christmas has left it under the door. Yeah.
Dion, I want to come to you because you touched on something before about fans just want owners to spend loads of money. One of the things that I've noticed a lot today is Liverpool fans saying, well, I'm done with FSG. I want them out the club. I think it's fair to say the grass isn't always greener. And when you look at the type of owners that could potentially come in to Liverpool, if FSG, a lot of fans got their way and FSG were out, what type of owners could realistically step in to Liverpool? And I suppose the second stage of that question is, in today's game, what actually does make good owners? Because I'd argue from my side that, without the deep pockets of a City, without the deep pockets of necessarily a Chelsea, FSG have run a tight ship. If you want to say sell to buy, others will say smart recruitment. They've been able to compete with the likes of Manchester City without breaking the bank. I would say on the whole that is good owners. Do you think that's not enough anymore now?
No, I think they have been pretty good owners in that regard, in that they've managed to make Liverpool competitive. Well, I think Klopp has made Liverpool competitive, but they hired Jurgen Klopp and he made Liverpool competitive. And I think without Klopp, none of it would have happened. I know there are other people involved. I know there are, Mike Edwards and the work he's done. But I believe when it comes to Jurgen Klopp, it's the great man theory of history. Like he changed things there in a way that nobody else could have. But FSG got him in. And
do you think it's fair, Dion, to say maybe their strategy has been masked, or the shortfalls in their strategy has been masked a little bit by Klopp's overachievements? Well,
yeah, but that's what he does. Like that's what a manager does. Like I don't think that's when people used to say Steven Gerrard carries the Liverpool team, or he does, like he was a better player than any of them. That's what better players tend to do. They tend to mask the deficiencies of other players in the side. So Klopp has possibly got, but I think they've been okay. Like they've been decent owners, but it does come back to that question. Like, and you touched upon it, Jamie, when you said sign Kylian Mbappe. If like Manchester City's owners are deemed to be good supporters of Manchester City by Manchester City fans. They have done a lot for the community. They have done an awful lot in all aspects of what you would consider to be good ownership of a club, and what you want from owners within the community. But there are still a lot of things, huge question marks and huge moral issues with actually whether you want an ownership model and owners like that for your club. Like, that's the reality. So, but they will be defended to the hilt by Manchester City fans, some of whom you may even hear this and then start abusing me on Twitter because anytime you suggest that there may be some issues with Manchester City and their ownership, you get abused for it. They're that loyal to them. But they are seen, and I'm not saying that if that happened with Liverpool, it would be the exact same. I don't think there's anything special and different about Liverpool supporters that if ownership model came in and they had connections to a state of questionable human rights practices or whatever, if anything like that happened, but they were buying Kylian Mbappe and they bought and they did the checklist, they went through the card for you, they will be defended to the hilt as well. So
just look at Luis Suarez. What did Luis Suarez do to Liverpool?
Yeah, well, Suarez is a great example of. So what do you want from own? And this is where you get into a paralysis about what modern football is, because there are no good owners. Like, as Daniel said, like the ownership model, the German model of fan ownership, that isn't going to happen from here. So do you want owners who are actually going to try and sustain it as a business, which FSG have done, and which, being as kind to them as you could be, is what prompted this move? Because you look at what John Henry has said about financial fair play, you look how much emphasis they wanted put on that at UEFA level, and how that hasn't really happened. So you being kind to them, you can see why they would feel that this is the only way, and because it is an American model that they're familiar with, that this is the thing that they need to get done to run a sustainable business. So do you want another owner coming in, if FSG go, that follow that model? It probably makes you ultimately feel a bit better about yourself than the moral conundrum of certain types of benefactors. But I don't think there are any simple answers. And I also do think as well, going back, and I obviously things are changed and it is more garish and more depressing now. But I wonder, like, ownership and the people who ran football clubs, people were always being taken advantage of by the people who ran football clubs. But it just happens to be, like, 60, 70 years ago, it was the players who were being taken advantage of. It's just gone global. Like, there's more people to take advantage of in a global game. But, like, you go back 60 years to, like, Tom Finney and these people being told you can't leave. You can't leave. Italy want, Torino want to sign you. Why do you want to go there, Tom? You stay at Preston. Like, players were suppressed by chairmen and owners, and they didn't need to take advantage of fans because there wasn't that. They didn't care about fans, though. They didn't have any. They may have been local people, so they might have had to engage with them, but they didn't care about the supporters. Clubs weren't. They weren't. The facilities weren't a thing. So there's always been an element of getting away with what you can get away with in ownership. It's just bigger and worse now. But I don't know where you go for. There's no good guys.
Steve Thomas sends in a super chat. Thank you, Steve. He says, LFC fan for 30 plus years, but I'm done with top level football after this. The game became too cynical, and we all know it's time to support my local club. It's funny you say that, Steve. I've been having this emotional battle with myself all season. Keith will know I'm moaning in the WhatsApp group pretty much daily at this stage, whether it was VAR. Look, football was a game that wasn't broken, and we're doing a very good impression or job of trying to break it. Whether it's VAR, the shit show that is VAR, whether it's no fans in stadiums, then you've got all this nonsense. I just feel like it's been an emotional battle for me this season. I didn't actually recover, and I say this probably every third podcast, so I really do need to stop. I didn't actually recover from the game at Goodison Park, whether it was the Henderson goal being disallowed. Like, of all the players that I wanted to see score a Derby goal, a Derby winner, it was Jordan Henderson. To have that taken away, the Van Dijk incident, everything about that game, a little bit of me was lost as a fan. I'm just hoping that we scrap VAR, we get fans back in stadiums, and we can start enjoying football again. But I do like your point, Steve, about supporting your local club. I spent a number of years at playing non-league, and they could certainly do with the support. Go for a pint, get a bag of chips, have a good chat with the players after the game, and get yourself home for a five. You can't go wrong. Now, Daniel, I want to come to you on the last topic before we wrap up, because we said we'd keep it to an hour. We know you boys have been busy over the last few days, so we'll try and wrap it up. How do we fix this mess? And I'm not saying, you're going to sit here and have all the answers, but it has been a ticking time bomb when you look at the finances within football. There's been there's been lots of suggestions over the last 24 hours, whether it's talk of adopting the 50+1 rule that's been used in the Bundesliga. There's been talk of salary caps, government legislation that we touched on before. Where do we start on trying to get to the bottom of this mess?
Yeah, that's the right question. Where do we start? I think, because how do we fix? I don't think there are possible answers to that now. I think football became a very willing participant in rampant capitalism and rampant commercialization, and I don't think you can walk back down that road. And honestly, I don't think football would want to, in kind of majority view. But we can start to wrestle things back, I believe. As I said earlier, it's unique that we will have these club owners on the back foot to such an extent that we might be able to implement some of this stuff. Now, on a personal view, I would roll back the Champions League proposals, the Swiss model proposals, because I think they're awful. I don't think they're as bad as the Super League, but I think that's probably only because they were presented in a more glossy catalogue. I think they're dreadful, so I'd roll those back. And yeah, supporter representation is a thing for me. Even if it's let's say a 10% representation on a board, so that any future owner and any current owner has a year to get it in place, that means that fans have an ultimate say so. So you don't get the MK Dons Wimbledon model. You don't get a club just being walked off into the sunset or thrown into the sea. That would be huge. That would be a huge victory. It really would, because we are talking about things that are very, very hard to implement, because by the very nature that they own the clubs, they also wield the power. So it's not easy, and I think it will take legislative enforcement. I don't think you can rely on goodwill with these people, because I think we've already proven from what we've talked about that just doesn't work. So I really, really hope this fan-led government review gets involved. I would encourage everyone to join their supporters trust. That's the great way of getting your view across. It's very easy for us, to moan about things, and that helps us blow off steam, and it helps us kind of cope with it, and it helps us kind of watch games again without getting angry. But there are things we can do now, and that, as I say, the last 48 hours have shown that protest and outrage can make a difference, and it isn't just empty. And that's a really, really positive spin on what's been a pretty horrible 2 days.
Where do you sit on it, Keith? What's the answer?
It's hard, because you can't put the genie back in the bottle once you've let it out. FSG sold 10% of their umbrella group for 450 million. So values their group at 4.5 billion. It's the German model of fan ownership. It's not going to happen. You're dealing in too much money. I think fan representation is right, but is it just a token gesture? Is it paying lip service? Maybe. I don't know if anyone knows. Is Tony Barrett still involved at Liverpool? He was meant to be a sort of liaison between management and fans. I don't know if Tony still does that.
He's probably busy.
Yeah, the phone's turned off. He's had enough. But I don't know if it's just more of that and more. The thing with FSG, speaking from FSG, they're not visible. They're never at Liverpool. Mike Gordon is maybe the most visible, but you don't hear from him. You know, if they're not going to be there and they're entrusting it to, you know, Mike Gordon and Michael Edwards, they need something, whether it's Tony Barrett, whether it's more people doing that. You have to be careful what you wish for as well. You don't want too much fan involvement, and the overall members model that I've seen mentioned for ownership. I mean, you only have to look at Barcelona. You know, they're not exactly the cleanest of clubs either, you know, so there's a slippery slope there. I just think it's gone past. I don't know what reform can be done in football. So England is one thing, the Premier League, the government can bring in some legislations and just look at the Premier League, but you know, salary caps that's not going to work. You've got players earning, like, where do you set the cap? Do you know what I mean? Like, the best players are earning 400,000 a week. You know, is that the cap? That's the fine cap for 90% of the league. You want to attract the players in. So it's similar to when the Premier League changed their transfer window date and nobody else changed their transfer window date, and it just handicapped them. You know, they could be doing the same. They could be doing the same with imposing wage cap. So it needs to be done at a higher level than just England. And I don't know what the answer is. It's just too, I think it's gone too far. I think it's too much money is involved now. That I think just listening to fans and taking it more in is the only way to get over the current crisis. But long term, I think it just goes back to the way it was. I think you have too many sharks in there trying to take bites out of pie. Do sharks eat pie? I don't know.
I know where you were going with that, mate. Don't worry. I think we all did. Dion, I want to come to you to finish, Dion. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. What have you learned from the last few days? There's no good guys.
Well, what have I learned? What I'd say is that this actually goes back to what I was going to say. If you ask me what would I do, I think that sometimes, like Keith said about it being a token gesture, if there's a fan representation on boards, I think some tokens and fig leaves, like when you talk about the European football pyramid, like one of the things I felt about it was, this is just a fig leaf. This doesn't exist. But actually, when you see it being taken away, you think that fig leaf is kind of important all the same. And it's the same. It's the same with this idea that the fans on the board would be token representation and they could be bypassed or they could be whatever. They're still there. They're still there. They're still a nuisance. There's still a presence if they're put there that can maybe at some point just be a nuisance. They may never stop anything, and everything may be done around them. They might, whatever. And it's the same for some of the ideas of football, because it is, like the idea that we're going back to the status quo. And I would say about like the idea of the no bad guy, like they're all bad guys. I think what was so bad about the Super League was it actually made all the other people look like good guys. That wasn't the thing. It wasn't that they're all equally bad. This was so badly executed and such a bad idea that it actually allowed everybody else to look like good guys. Now, I didn't agree. Sky Sports saying the good guys, someone else Sky Sports, the good guys have won. Maybe the supporters can fit into that category, but nobody else. But they were allowed to look like that. But it kind of emphasized to me that some of the things that I would be kind of cynical about, and I would have been cynical about even as this was unfolding, the idea of the football pyramid and the idea that these things are actually real, because it's a romantic notion, the idea that that you can actually journey through the divisions and through the leagues, but they do have some meaning and they do have some purpose, and that's the one kind of positive thing I would take from it. And then, but I think if we're back in the status quo, we'll all be back in the status quo. And I'm always very wary of these huge outpourings of emotion where people say in any kind of situation things are going to change from this, because a lot of times people it's like, be kind or something like this on Twitter. It's like that. Like this is
starting from now. Starting from now, be kind. Yeah.
This has to be something. Daniel's right. Like this moment can't be wasted, and like it has to be utilized somehow. And I think if it is that you have fans on boards, and that would be a start, and it would be some progress.
Just to finish, Danny sent in a super chat. Thank you for that. Let's be fair, lads. FFP was never about leveling the playing field. It was always a way of stopping the so-called new money from competing. And I think the inability of FFP to kind of continue to do what it was meant to set out to do is probably one of the reasons which drove FSG to look for new investments and maybe explore different avenues. So fair point to finish on. Now, gents, a couple of housekeeping bits just to finish on. I know we're now up for the hour, so I don't want to keep you any longer. A couple of things to call out before we wrap up. If you have articles, opinions, stories that you want to share on our website, please do send them in to lfcdaytrippers@gmail.com and we'll get them up on the website right away. We also now have the Discord group. I think it's up around 300, 400 members now. The chat is popping every single day. The link will be in the description below. So sign up, come and get involved. It's like Twitter, but without the shouting and abuse. So it's definitely worth checking out. Subscribers, don't forget we are fast approaching 10k YouTube subscribers. When we hit that milestone, we will be giving away a PlayStation 5 with FIFA 21 to one of our subscribers. So please do subscribe if you haven't already, and tell your friends to do the same. Finally, shout out to footballprizes.co.uk if you want to win the signed and framed Jordan Henderson montage, which includes the replica Champions League medal. It's only $4.95 to enter. There are 66 tickets available, and the offer ends next Wednesday. From us, big thanks to Keith, Daniel, and Dion for their time. It's very much appreciated. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you to everybody in the live chat. Your comments, as always, have been brilliant, and they really do help make the show. If you could also leave a comment underneath this video to let us know what you thought of the show, what you'd like to see more or less of, we'll make sure we get to that in the coming weeks. So with that, that's enough from us. I hope everybody has enjoyed the show. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and we will be back with you next Wednesday on the Midweek Fix. All the best.